Okay, so today we're actually going to talk about fear. And as we start the new year, I want you to kind of think of all of those things that you've been held back from achieving or starting, or just even opening up a new book, or applying for school, or applying for a new job, or even going up to that girl that you see at the gym all the time that you'd like to speak to. Anything that you've been wanting or intending to do, I'd like you to start thinking about what's been holding you back. What maybe negative self-cognitions have you been telling yourself that have been holding you back from doing that thing that you want to do? So today we're going to talk a little bit about how fear works in the brain, kind of what happens to your body. We're going to talk a little bit about PTSD. So I just finished my EMDR training, and for those of you that don't know what EMDR is, so that actually stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. And I know that's a mouthful, but what EMDR really is we're focusing on specific traumas, whether those are big traumas or little traumas. We like to call those big T's or little T's. So we talk about how those big T's or little T's throughout our lives might have affected our sense of self and our negative self-cognitions as adults, and even today. So let me give you an example. So a big T might be getting in a huge 6-car pileup accident when you were 6 years old, and you might have seen, a lot of blood, a lot of gore, maybe even someone died in front of you in the accident. So that's a really big trauma. So you store the sounds of the crashing, the sights of the blood, the sounds of the sirens, or the firemen or police officers that show up on the scene. So you store all of that traumatic information in your brain. And so as you get older, with that big T kind of stored in your hippocampus, which is our memory center, every time you might hear a siren, you might have an emotional reaction of fear, where our palms can get sweaty, our heart starts racing, where we're in that fight or flight response. And that biologically, primitively, is our body's response to a predator or a dangerous situation, right? So that's a big T, and that's something that is sometimes out of our control as well, right? Accidents and things like that. Big T could also be, if you had an abusive parent, or maybe your father abused you or your mother abused you. Those kind of big T's, where our parents are supposed to be our nurturers, providers, and protectors. Those are also big T's, where we have to kind of reorganize our sense of what a healthy parent is in our lives. Now let me talk about little T's. And a lot of times people come into treatment saying, hey, I don't have as much trauma as this person next to me in a group. How come I became a heroin addict? Or how come I became an alcoholic? Why do I use vodka to help calm me down when I have these memories? So a lot of times first of all, I would say, never compare your trauma to somebody else's, because that word trauma, it doesn't always necessarily mean that you've been a victim of a car accident or abuse or something like that. Trauma can be something like maybe your dad never, gave you a hug or told you that he loved you when you were younger. But he was maybe there, and he provided a roof over your head, and he was, a good enough father. And the child psychologist Donald Winnicott, he says that, our parents need to be good enough. But a lot of times they have, despite that, they have still instilled these negative beliefs about ourselves just from these little interactions that might have been lacking. It could be you came home once from school and you showed your parent your straight A's on your report card, and your mom might have said, oh, that's okay, that's pretty good, and just shrugged her shoulders. Now, in our hippocampus, we might store that information as, we're not good enough. And even though objectively we look at that and say, oh, so what? Mom was having a bad day, right? As a child, as our brain is developing, or as we're seeking that positive reinforcement, that is often where fear is born. And that's why I love that acronym, which is the title of this topic, which is False Evidence Appearing Real. So while fear is useful, and in fact it's essential for our survival, it's good to be fearful of that dark alley where there might be one individual walking towards you. It's good to have some fear response to that, right? But where it gets unhealthy is when we start to kind of pair those negative cognitions that we've received all throughout our lives as a result of fear with real events that are happening today, and it's holding us back from getting what we actually want, right? So if we, had those little T's of feeling rejected by our parents, for example, or rejected by men or rejected by women when we were growing up in high school, or we could never get a date, right? We've got this negative reinforcement that, hey, our hippocampus now has it stored. You are going to get rejected, or no one's ever going to love you, right? And so fear is what starts to be stored in our body, and because fear starts in our body, and that's where, when we do that EMDR trauma work, we're actually focusing on the sensations in the body. There's a lot less talking happening in EMDR therapy. It's a lot more focused on, one of the things we say as therapists is, where do you feel that in your body? What are you noticing? As opposed to, how do you feel about that? Which is a question that we never try to ask in trauma therapy, because obviously we feel pretty crappy about the fact that, our father left us when we were young, or, we got into this huge accident, we might have lost our sister in this accident, right? It doesn't feel good. Trauma is something that, depending on what stage we're at developmentally, it can cause some real issues for us as we get older. So what I'd like you to kind of think about, one exercise that I like to use with some of my clients, is identifying some of those big T's and little T's throughout our lives. And this was something that was a really, really good exercise for me. I've never really endured a big T in my life. I've never really had a big traumatic incident or event happen that I had to recover from. But I noticed as I started to do this work, I had some little T's. And, a lot of them didn't even come from growing up or childhood or my parents or my upbringing. Came from the school environment I was in, constantly comparing myself to, other kids that I was in middle school with or high school. And that internal comparison could feel like a little T, like I wasn't good enough. Almost like if you were the last one picked for, a basketball game when you were in 8th grade, right? That can almost be a little T, where we start to store this information in our hippocampus that says we're not good enough, right? So there's a lot of different effects that happen when we're storing this information, and our big T's and little T's have a big effect on that. So what I encourage you to do is I encourage you to take a look at all your big T's and little T's over your lifetime. Start to take an inventory of those. Even if it was, I always felt like I was in competition with my older sister. Right? She always got, she got the new car, she got the new clothes, and my parents it always felt like she was always first, or always got favorited over me, right? So that can also be a little T. And the next step is to say, whether that's that big T or little T, what does that say about me, or what negative, we call it a negative cognition, what negative cognition have I kind of started to believe about myself? So for example, if I wasn't picked for that basketball team, or I was the last one to be picked, the negative cognition is, I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, right? Or I'm not athletic enough, right? Or if I wasn't, if I didn't win this pageant, or, if that boy didn't ask me out to prom, is it I'm not pretty enough, right? Or I'm not skinny enough. Whatever we tell ourselves as men and women that perpetuate these negative self-beliefs. All right, so Kelsey asked, does Akua provide any specific trauma therapy or programming for clients that need a little more trauma therapy? Absolutely. So here at Akua, we have 3 of us here are actually EMDR trained. 2 of us are working on finishing our EMDR training. And that really, for those of you that haven't heard about EMDR or don't know about it, I highly recommend you research it. And you can even start your own EMDR if you have insurance, or you can privately pay for it. But just to get a sense for what traumas in your life might have led to some of these negative patterns that might be playing themselves out in relationships or with addiction, right? But here at Akua, we do offer EMDR. Particularly, what we will do is do an assessment to see how these big or little T's have really affected your day-to-day functioning, and primarily if they have really led to your addictive behaviors as well. We really want to help kind of extinct that negative behavior, and that starts with the big and little T's. So we do EMDR. We also do trauma groups here, where we start to kind of identify the relationship between those big and little T's and those negative cognitions. And that's where I love that acronym, false evidence appearing real, because it really was an actual event, or it could have been something that truly did happen, right? but we're still holding on to it 20 years later. So why, as human beings, do we hold on to this thing, this image, right? And we replay it over and over again through nightmares or flashbacks, or even when we get into toxic relationships, right? When we might be trying to like fix that trauma with our father, if we get into a relationship with a new man, or vice versa with a woman and our mothers, right? A lot of times in our current relationships, we're trying to repair past trauma, right, with our parents. Not all the time, but subconsciously. This is Carl Jung would say this might be happening on a subconscious level, an unconscious level. So that idea that false evidence is appearing real basically means that even though your father might not have told you that he loved you every day, when you were younger, does not mean you're unlovable, right? So as children, though, we look to our parents to give us all of the cues that inform who we are, that build our identity, right? So they're our heroes, they're our models, our blueprints for being human beings in the world, right? So what we need to do is kind of take a step back and objectively take a look at this person that may or may not have intentionally caused me harm or instilled this negative self-concept in me. Let me put myself in their shoes, right? How was their parenting, right? Did my dad get good parenting? Was his father around? Was my mother nurturing to him? Were they a good enough, what Winnicott would say, a good enough parent? Which means, they're not abusive, but they don't have to be doting and loving and telling you you're the perfect child every single day, right? They're just there as a support and providing space. What we do here at Akua is a lot of family work. Now, family therapy can also basically be trauma therapy. And a lot of times out there in the world of psychology, they're not synonymous, but I tend to think they are because a lot of our early traumas took place with our parents or without our parents, especially if our parents weren't gone. If your parents were addicts or alcoholics, or if they had, personality disorders, like if they were borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality, and they have a very hard time, looking at you and nurturing you as opposed to looking, just only out for themselves, right? We tend to take all that in and take it personally as children because we're children, right? When we're babies, when we're kids developing, we are looking for all of the validation and support from our parents, right? All of our cues for who we are in the world, mommy telling us, hey, great goal at soccer, or hey, good report card, or amazing science project, right? We're looking for that validation from parents. And so a lot of our fear stems from that unhealthy attachment to validation. So one of the first steps to conquering this fear is what we like to call it's like fear conditioning, right? So in the same way that you've been conditioned to have a fear about something. So for example, if father, as a female, if your father never told you that he loves you or never gave you physical affection, right? A lot of times as we get older, as females, we might have issues with attachments with new males in our lives and relationships. And this is just an example, right? So how do we overcome that now? Now, first of all, it could be fear extinction, which basically means we now couple a positive cognition with some of these uncomfortable feelings. So say every time that this female would go out on a new date with a male, there was that feeling of being worthless or unlovable or not good enough, right? Because that came from her father, right? So now the idea is not to just avoid men for the rest of your life, to avoid that feeling, right? It's basically to extinct that fear. When we try to extinct any behavior, we do a little bit of exposure to it, and then we start to pair, what's called, we kind of bring in a new feeling, a positive cognition with that event. So say this adult woman is now out on a date with a new man who finds her funny and attractive and wonderful, right? A good thing that she could start telling herself is, wow, I'm worthwhile, I'm lovable. But also at the same time, not having an attachment to the outcome, right? Because if for any reason he never calls her back, or he doesn't tell her that she's beautiful, or doesn't say that he likes her, that she doesn't see that, store that as continuing negative information about herself, but she starts to learn, hey, I do not necessarily need to thrive off that validation in order to have a stronger sense of self. So, really important and powerful things with fear are positive affirmations, because we're actually rewiring your whole brain, all of the neural pathways in your brain, because the thalamus is the first place that we extract fear, right? And then usually what happens when we go from the thalamus, we start going to our amygdala. If it's a really life-threatening response, if there's, if our parents don't tell us they love us our whole lives, a lot of times our amygdala takes that in. That's our emotional center of our brain. And then it goes to the prefrontal cortex, and then it goes to our hippocampus where it remembers, right? So there's these 5 different centers of the brain that we're kind of this fear track, and they're all connected, right? So what we have to do now is start exposing ourselves to those sensations that might make us feel uncomfortable, right? So if you don't like speaking in front of people, but you really want to get over that fear, right? Good place to start is, just speaking in front of 2 or 3 friends, right? Encountering that fear, and then challenging it, but pairing it with a positive cognition. Now, that's why, the cheesy positive affirmations like, I am worth it, I am good enough, I am good enough exactly as I am today. What that actually starts doing in the brain chemistry is actually changing when you say those words, right? Thoughts become words and then they become action, right? So that's why talk therapy can be effective, because the second we're saying something out loud to somebody else, it becomes a little bit more real. Somebody else is witnessing it. So if all I'm saying is, I'm a piece of crap, no one loves me, my father doesn't love me, men will never love me, that continues to be a negative track that plays in our brain. Now, if we start to say out loud, to our friends or in groups or to our therapist, hey, I am lovable, I am good enough, I am worthwhile, starts to create a new track in our brain. So we're no longer using that fear track. We're actually now using a more positive part of our brain that actually can start, it's in part of our limbic system that starts feeling really good. We start producing more dopamine. We start actually, getting those effects of feeling even a little high off, even if it's even if we're just kind of pulling positive affirmations out of our hat, it does feel good because our brain starts to go, wait a second, you're so used to living in self-pity or fear. This is new. It feels foreign, but it feels good, right? So a couple things that we can do with fear that I've kind of talked to you about. Get in those uncomfortable situations if you can. Start to tell yourself some positive affirmations. Challenge those irrational beliefs, okay? Notice if you have any fears today. So like I said, if you're wanting to apply for a new job, or if you're wanting to ask this girl out on a date, whatever it is, start to take a look at, hey, are those fears today rooted in any big T's or little t's of my past? And how can I kind of start to take a look at those and uncouple those so they don't rule my life? So I'm not living in fear. And because it's very easy to let fear control you. And part of what we like to do here at Akua is try to teach our clients to empower themselves so that they have control over fear. Now, saying that, for example, like I think I have arachnophobia, and I am terrified of spiders. If a spider walked into this room right now, you would see me scream my face off and run out because I'm scared, right? And there are some rational, fears there. The spider could bite me, or I could be injured, and but really it's just I don't like the look of them. They have 8 legs and they're creepy and they're scary, right? So I have this fear ingrained in me since I was little of spiders, right? Okay, so part of that's healthy and natural, right? But again, also it's a lot of it gets in the way of my life, right? I want to be able to, get a spider out of a room. I'm vegan, so I don't kill animals, so I want to be able to take the spider, get it out of the house, and not freak out and not be able to sleep in that space or be in that space because I let the spider control where I am and who I am, right? So what I need to do is confront the fact that, hey, this thing's not going to hurt me. This thing's just living his life, and I'm in control, right? So I like to use that analogy because if I can say, I'm the human being here, he's probably terrified of me, right? And start to take control of the situation, that's kind of my kind of metaphor for, is this fear controlling me, or can I take a bigger picture and say, look, hey, this is my life. If I want to choose to go start writing this book, or if I want to go skydiving, what is the rational fear that's holding me back? But what are those irrational fears from childhood, or irrational fears from those big T's and little t's that are no longer serving me, and how do I let go of those? Okay, so I think I've talked enough. So I just want to thank you guys for joining us again this week. We will be back again next week at 1 p.m. for another Facebook Live. Hope this was helpful for you. Conquer your fears this new year. But also take a look at where those fears rooted from, and that should really help you objectively look at where these came from. So All right, guys, thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. Have a wonderful week.